Hello, Haradrim. Welcome to Gamertopia. The Campfire chat has just concluded, and I don't know about you, but I'm super excited for a lot of the upcoming changes for the next week. That's right, it has been confirmed that patch 1.3.3 will be released on Tuesday, March 5th, like many of us anticipated. This means the Gauntlet and so much more is going to be released in just a few short days, so let's check it out. Before we continue, make sure you're subscribed to my channel if you aren't already. As new content is released, I'll keep releasing new videos to make sure you're staying up to date on all the latest Diablo news, and it also helps me out with YouTube suggesting my videos to more Diablo fans, so I really appreciate it. Alright, let's check out what's coming up in patch 1.3.3. First off, just to reiterate, this patch is going to be released on Tuesday, March 5th, and we can expect a bunch of updates. To start, one of the biggest changes we're going to see are the Season 2 vampiric powers making a comeback. We all expected this for Season 3 since we got some of our Season 1 content in the form of rings dropped by Varshan in Season 2. For Season 3, we're getting new legendary powers that closely replicate, if not identically replicate, 5 of the vampiric powers that we had in Season 2. Those legendary powers are going to be Accursed Touch, Blood Boil, Hectic, Metamorphosis, Moonrise, and Undying. So let's check out what these do. Aspect of Accursed Touch is going to give us a lucky hit chance of up to 35% to have our skills cause vampiric curse, and the enemies that become cursed will also become vulnerable. Vampiric Curse also releases stored souls and do up to 50% increased damage. This vampiric power was used in a ton of meta builds last season, and I'm sure it's going to be one, if not the most used of the new legendary powers when the patch is released. Blood Boiling aspect will spawn 3 volatile blood drops whenever a core skill overpowers, and when you collect those blood drops, they explode, dealing up to 6,895 physical damage. Also, we are guaranteed to overpower every 20 seconds. This is also going to be incredibly powerful for the many builds that are based around overpower. Thinking about the many of Hammer of the Ancients builds that there are, and just having another guaranteed overpower to add to it is crazy. Undying defensive aspect heals you for 2% life whenever you cast a skill, and this effect is doubled to up to 4% if you're below 50% health. This is going to be great for some of the leveling and pushing builds where survivability is imperative. Mobility aspect of Metamorphosis causes you to turn into a cloud of bats and become unstoppable for 2.5 seconds whenever you use evade. Enemies along your path take 13,789 physical damage and are given vampiric curse, and your evade's cooldown will be increased by 5 to 10 seconds. This one will work great with some of the builds that take advantage of buffs from the unstoppable effect. Offensive aspect of the Moonrise causes your basic attacks to give you 4% stacking attack speed buff that goes up to 20%. Then once you reach the maximum stacks, your basic skills do up to 80% increased damage, and you'll also get a 15% movement speed increase. Any build that uses a basic skill could benefit from this. Lastly, we have Hectic Utility aspect, which will give you a random skill cooldown reduction by up to 4 seconds after you cast 5 basic skills. Again, any build that uses a basic attack can benefit from this. All of these were super strong in Season 2, so I can totally understand why they chose to bring these back, and I'm sure these are going to open up a ton of new builds that are going to be incredibly viable for all the endgame content, including the Gauntlet. Before we get into the Gauntlet, there are a few season and class specific updates that were going to be included in the upcoming patch, so let's check those out. Starting out with our Construct, they removed the ability for our Construct to receive buffs that are caused by player skills that are meant for nearby allies. While this is not necessarily a benefit to players of any kind, I don't see it affecting gameplay much since there are a few skills that buff allies like that. For Tuning Stones, the Poison Support Tuning Stone will no longer reapply the Construct damage bonus when it spreads. Bleeding Support's bleeding damage has been reduced from 20 to 10%, and Burning Support's bonus critical strike damage and skill rank were both halved. A whole lot of nerfs for Tuning Stones, but as far as I know, these stones are not some of the more popular Tuning Stones to use, so again, I don't think these changes will affect gameplay too much. This last one though is kind of a big one. The one governing stone change that was made to Tempest, which has the skill no longer gain bonus damage and duration when it is recast on the same enemy or when it spreads from killing an enemy. This is going to be a really big nerf for a lot of the current meta builds since a ton of them are using the Tempest skill. While the current way the Tempest is working is not what the game developers intended for, this fix is going to affect a lot of the current builds that players are using. Now for the Barbarian class, they are buffing some of the basic skills for for the early gameplay. I personally didn't think that the Barbarian class was a slow class to start, so I'm not sure what prompted this, but maybe it's just my opinion. Other than this, strategic ground stomp cooldown reduction is being increased to 2 seconds. Strategic Iron Skin Fortify will increase from 15 to 20%, and Prime Call of the Ancients bonus damage will increase from 10 to 20%. Some small buffs to some of the underused skills for this build to possibly prompt new builds to form. We'll see what comes from those. This last one is interesting to me. The unique Gore's Devastating Grip is getting a buff, increasing the ranks of Whirlwind from 1 to 2 to 2 to 3, and the explosion damage is increased from 16 to 26% to 25 to 35%. I'd really like to see some new builds come out of this, since Hammer of the Ancients and Charge Barbarian is basically every build currently used. Maybe we'll see some new Whirlwind based builds with these and some of the other changes. Next, we have the Sorceress, which is going to be getting some buffs specific to Incinerate. The damage will be increased by 40% for the skill. The enhanced Incinerate damage is increased from 25 to a huge 50% damage. Destructive Incinerate enemy damage reduction will be increased from 25 to 30%, and the greater Incinerate immobilize duration will be increased by 0.5 seconds. Other than that, all they gave us was, quote, buffs to conjuration skills, underused passives, and paragon glyphs. This was incredibly vague, so I suppose we'll just need to wait to see what that entails. Now we have some Druid buffs. Druid will be getting some early game buffs, which I totally understand because Druid is by far one of the slowest building classes in the game. They really don't pick up the pace until you've gone well into your paragon board points, so this entirely makes sense. They gave one example of Wind Shear with some damage and spirit generation increases. Druids will also see companion damage buffs and buffs to underused passives. Again, very vague, but a nice idea since the companion builds tend to be lacking for Druids. The Storm's Companion unique will specifically see a buff for Druids, giving ranks of Wolves an increase from 2 to 3 to 4 to 5, and Storm Howl's damage will be increased by roughly 180%. This seems like a really big buff for this item, but I honestly haven't kept up with Druids since the preseason, so definitely let me know in the comments what you think of this. Now for the Rogue, we have Heartseeker and Forceful Arrow attack speeds increased by 20% to get some new builds that move away from Puncture. Flurry's damage is increased by 10% with its modifiers, improved and advanced Flurry getting buffs as well. Precision stacks will be reduced from 6 to 4 stacks, making it proc more often, and Aspect of Branching Volleys is getting redesigned as well. We're seeing some more vagueness here, so we'll have to see the patch notes release for more details on these. Lastly, we have Necromancers, which are getting a ton of buffs, many of which I'm excited to see. Minions are getting a bunch of buffs, starting with a 20% damage increase and 10% health increase. Hellbent Commander's damage bonus is increased by 50% for each rank. The Cult Leader Legendary Node gets a 5% increase in minion damage bonus. The Corporeal Glyph now gives us 1% increased damage for each active minion, and Skeletal Reapers can be expected to spawn more or the expected amount of corpses. Then we'll also get some buffs to underused passives like Spiked Armor, now granting Thorns and up to 15% additional armor. Also, Death's Reach is totally getting changed to a different passive called Death's Advance. So now instead of increased damage to distant enemies, we get increased movement speed by up to 12%. These are just listed as examples here, so it's possible there are going to be other changes as well. The Necromancer will also receive buffs to core skills Blight, Blood Surge, and Sever to get more builds to move away from Bone Spear. While a lot of these updates were very vague, I feel like a lot of the changes are heading in the right direction for classes. I personally am very excited for Necromancer buffs and can't wait to see what kind of minion builds we see coming up. Alright, now for the content we've all been waiting for, the Gauntlet. For the Gauntlet, we'll have 8 minutes to get the highest score possible, with the Gauntlet being static for 1 week, meaning all the shrines, chests, monsters, bosses, and the layout of the dungeon itself staying the same for 1 week. So this means we have 1 week to find the best strategy to get the highest score and place our names on that leaderboard. The Gauntlet will have monsters, elite monsters, and bosses all at level 124 to kill, and each kill you do will give you proofs of might, which is basically your score or points for the Gauntlet. The more you kill, the higher your score, but there's more to it than that. You'll have a set amount of enemies in the Gauntlet, and when they're all gone, they do not respawn until you respawn them. You do this by activating specific shrines that respawn all enemies and allow for you to raise your score. There are also chances to drop keys that allow for you to open chests that contain proofs of might, and more shrines that also give you proofs of might. It seems that there's going to be a lot of strategizing based on what was said involved for the Gauntlet in order to get the highest possible score, which will be interesting to see in itself. For the leaderboards, we'll have class-specific boards for solo play, along with 2, 3, and 4 player team boards leaderboards, so it'll be fun to see how far you can get on your own and with a group as well. I'm super excited for the Gauntlet, and with this gameplay and info release, I can't wait to see if I can score my name on that leaderboard. Let me know what you think of the updates in the comments, and make sure to stay tuned for more content on the Gauntlet when it is released.